There's a moment when you realize that everything they taught you about power was designed to keep you powerless. It happens in an instant, perhaps when you're sitting across from someone who supposedly has authority over you, watching them desperately explain why they deserve respect. Or maybe it's when you see someone screaming into the void of social media, begging strangers to validate their existence. That's when it hits you. True power operates in complete silence. The revelation cuts through you like cold steel, because suddenly you understand why Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But he was only scratching the surface. The real secret isn't about being feared. It's about being unfathomable. It's about possessing something so profound, so unshakable, that others can't even begin to categorize what they're dealing with. You see, there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of power that pervades every corner of our society. People think power is about having more money, more followers, more recognition, more noise. They mistake volume for authority, visibility for influence, explanation for strength. They're playing checkers while the real game is quantum chess, operating on dimensions they can't even perceive. The philosophy that transforms everything begins with a single recognition. Authentic power is never about what others can see. It's about what they can sense, but never quite grasp. It's the difference between a hurricane that announces itself with fury and destruction and gravity, silent, invisible, but bending the entire universe to its will without ever needing to justify its existence. When you truly understand this, you stop participating in the theater of conventional power dynamics entirely. You don't need the corner office because your presence transforms any room you enter. You don't need the luxury car because your confidence moves through space with more impact than any machine. You don't need the designer clothes because your energy is so compelling that people remember how you made them feel long after they've forgotten what anyone was wearing. This isn't about rejecting material success. It's about transcending the desperate need to use possessions as proof of worth. Machiavelli understood this when he observed that the lion cannot protect himself from traps and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Most people choose to be either the lion, all roar and muscle, or the sheep, all vulnerability and need. But true power operates as something else entirely, the force that shapes the environment itself. Consider what happens when someone attacks you directly in a professional setting. The conventional response is immediate defense or counterattack. That's not true, you might say, or actually, if you look at the data. But watch what happens when you do something different entirely. Let's say you're in a meeting and someone announces, "I don't think Sarah has the experience to lead this project." The room turns to you, expecting justification, explanation, defense. Instead, you pause, 3 full seconds of silence while you maintain perfect eye contact. Then you say, "Thank you for sharing that perspective, Michael." Another pause. Then you turn to the project materials and say, "Now regarding the Q3 deliverables," and continue as if nothing happened. What you've done is more devastating than any argument. You've demonstrated that their opinion requires no response because it has no power over your reality. You've shown everyone in the room that you operate from a place so secure that external judgment becomes irrelevant noise. Michael will spend the next hour wondering why his attack felt like punching smoke, while everyone else recognizes they've witnessed something they can't quite name, but definitely don't want to challenge. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. But he didn't go far enough. The advanced understanding is that when you master authentic presence, people don't just see appearances, they sense depth they can't fathom, which creates a kind of psychological gravity that draws them toward you even when they can't explain why. The digital realm offers perfect training ground for developing this mastery. Social media has created a 24/7 theater where people perform their insecurities disguised as confidence. They post their meals, their workouts, their achievements, their thoughts, their emotions, a constant stream of evidence that they exist and matter. But what happens when you operate differently? Imagine someone posts a passive-aggressive comment on your content. Must be nice to have so much free time. The immediate impulse is to explain or justify or counterattack, but power never explains. Instead, you heart the comment. That's it. No words, no justification, no engagement with the implicit criticism. You've just turned their attempt at diminishment into an acknowledgement of something they wish they had. The heart says, "Thank you for noticing my abundance," without saying anything at all. Or someone tries to publicly question your expertise. "I'm not sure you're qualified to speak on this topic." Again, the conventional response is credentials, degrees, experience. But watch what happens when you simply respond, "I appreciate your concern." Nothing more. You've acknowledged their attempt at power while remaining completely unaffected by it. They're left holding their question like a weapon that fired blanks, while your confidence suggests depths they can't access or understand. This principle extends into romantic dynamics with even more profound effects. Consider the moment when someone you're dating tries to make you jealous by mentioning another person's interest in them. "Someone at work asked me out today," they say, watching your face for signs of insecurity or possessiveness. The conventional response is either jealousy or forced indifference. But power operates differently. You pause, smile slightly, and say, "Good, that confirms my excellent taste." Then you change the subject entirely. What you've done is transformed their attempt at creating scarcity into confirmation of value, but value that you recognized first and remain secure in possessing. They wanted to create anxiety, but you've demonstrated such deep confidence in your worth and their choice that their test becomes meaningless. Here's where it transcends simple tactics and becomes philosophy. This isn't about manipulation or games. It's about developing such profound self-possession that external attempts at destabilization literally cannot find purchase. You're not pretending to be unaffected. You genuinely are unaffected because you understand something fundamental about the nature of reality that most people miss entirely. The secret is this: everyone is walking around with a constant internal narrator that seeks validation for its story about who they are. When they attack, question, or test you, they're really asking you to participate in their narrative of doubt and insecurity. But when you operate from genuine power, you're not even playing the same game. You're writing a completely different story, one where their chapter doesn't define your plot. This creates what I call the gravitational effect. Just as massive objects in space bend the fabric of reality around them, authentic personal power bends social reality. People start to organize themselves around your energy without understanding why. They find themselves seeking your approval, even when they disagree with you. They think about you when you're not there. They measure their own choices against what they imagine you would do. Machiavelli wrote that it is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. But the deeper truth is that when you embody authentic power, titles become irrelevant entirely. You don't need to be the CEO to run the meeting. You don't need to be the host to control the energy of the room. You don't need official authority to have everyone unconsciously looking to you for direction. This happens because most people are drowning in their own uncertainty, constantly seeking external confirmation that they're doing life correctly. When they encounter someone who clearly doesn't need that confirmation, who operates from an internal locus of certainty, it's both threatening and magnetic. They want to tear you down to their level, but they also want to absorb whatever you have that they're missing. The practical application of this understanding transforms every interaction. When someone interrupts you mid-sentence, instead of talking louder or stopping entirely, you simply pause. Look at them with mild curiosity and wait. Not aggressively, as if you're genuinely interested in what was so important it couldn't wait. They'll fumble through their interruption, realize how rude they've been, and then you continue exactly where you left off as if they'd never spoken. They've just learned that your words have weight and deserve respect, but you taught them without saying a word about respect. When someone tries to rush you, "I need an answer right now," you slow down instead of speeding up. "Let me think about that," you say, and then you actually take time to think, regardless of their urgency. They'll push, "But I really need to know now." You respond, "I understand. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow." What you're teaching them is that their timeline doesn't automatically become your emergency, and that quality decision-making is more valuable than reactive speed. In group settings, when everyone is talking over each other, you speak quietly, not whispering, but with enough subtlety that people have to quiet down to hear you. Within minutes, the entire dynamic shifts. Everyone else adjusts their volume downward to match yours, effectively placing you at the center of the conversational energy without you having to demand or compete for attention. But here's where it gets dangerous, in the most beautiful way possible. This isn't just about individual interactions. When you consistently operate from this place of unshakable internal authority, you begin to reshape entire social ecosystems around your presence. People start editing themselves before they speak to you, not out of fear, but out of recognition that casual thoughtlessness doesn't match the energy you bring to every exchange. You become like a tuning fork for authenticity. Fake people can't maintain their personas around you because the contrast becomes too obvious, even to them. Shallow conversation dies naturally in your presence because something in your listening demands depth. Manipulation tactics fail because they require participation from someone who needs external validation, and you've transcended that need entirely. This is what Machiavelli understood when he wrote that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. But he was still thinking in terms of conscious choice. The deeper truth is that when you embody authentic power, you unconsciously attract people who are capable of matching or complementing your energy, while those who operate from insecurity or manipulation naturally drift away from your orbit. The silence becomes your signature. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of someone who understands that words have power only when they're necessary. You speak when your voice adds value. You're quiet when others need space to reveal themselves. You listen not to respond, but to understand the deeper currents beneath what's being said. This creates an almost mystical effect in conversations. People find themselves saying things to you they've never said to anyone else. Not because you're prying or pushing, but because your quality of attention creates a space where truth feels safer than performance. They walk away from conversations with you feeling strangely understood, even though you barely spoke. In professional environments, this translates to a kind of leadership that transcends hierarchy. Ideas you suggest casually in passing somehow become the direction everyone agrees to pursue. Projects you express mild concern about get reconsidered without you having to argue against them. Your opinion carries weight not because of your title or expertise, but because people have learned that when you speak, it's worth listening. The financial implications of this kind of power are profound, though they operate through mechanisms most people never notice. When you embody unshakable confidence, you don't chase opportunities, they chase you. When you demonstrate that you don't need any particular deal, job, or relationship, you create negotiating leverage that no technique or strategy can manufacture. Watch what happens when you're negotiating salary and the hiring manager says, "This is our final offer." Instead of accepting or arguing, you pause, then say, "I appreciate you sharing your position. Let me consider whether this opportunity aligns with what I'm looking for." Then you stop talking, not as a tactic, but as a genuine assessment. You're not threatening to walk away. You're actually evaluating whether you want to walk toward this. The psychological effect is devastating to conventional power dynamics. They were prepared for you to want the job desperately. They were ready to leverage your need against you. But when you demonstrate that you're evaluating them as much as they're evaluating you, the entire framework shifts. Suddenly they're wondering what they might be missing about you, or what other options you have that make you so selective. This isn't about playing hard to get. It's about being hard to get because you've built a life so rich in possibilities that any single opportunity has to truly add value to deserve your attention. You're not pretending you don't need the money. You've structured your reality so that you have options, which means you can make choices from strength rather than desperation. The romantic applications of this understanding create relationships that operate on entirely different principles than what most people experience. When you're genuinely content with your own company, you don't date to fill a void. You date to share abundance. When someone threatens to leave, you help them pack, not out of spite, but out of respect for their autonomy and confidence in your own worth. If you're not happy here, you should definitely pursue what makes you feel fulfilled, you might say when they're testing your attachment. They were expecting bargaining, pleading, promises of change. Instead, you've offered them complete freedom while demonstrating such self-possession that the threat loses all power. Most of the time, they discover they don't actually want to leave. They were just trying to create artificial urgency to avoid facing their own uncertainty about whether they deserve what you're offering. This level of authentic detachment, not emotional coldness, but freedom from desperate need, creates relationships where people stay because they want to, not because they feel trapped or obligated. The love that emerges from this foundation is more passionate, not less, because it's chosen freely every day rather than maintained through fear or manipulation. But wait until you see what happens when this philosophy encounters its real test: public humiliation attempts. Someone tries to embarrass you in front of a group. Maybe they share an unflattering story about you, or try to correct you about something you never actually said, or make a joke at your expense that crosses the line from playful to cruel. The conventional responses are all some form of reaction. Defend yourself, counterattack, laugh it off awkwardly, or retreat in hurt silence. But power never reacts. It responds. And sometimes it responds with something that reframes the entire interaction so completely that the attempted humiliation becomes the humiliator's humiliation. You pause. You look at the person with what can only be described as gentle curiosity, as if you're an anthropologist who's just witnessed a fascinating cultural ritual you don't quite understand. Then you say, "That's interesting. What made you feel like you needed to say that?" Not accusatory, not defensive, genuinely curious about their internal process. What you've done is shifted the focus from the content of their attack to the motivation behind it. Everyone in the room is now looking at them, wondering the same thing you just asked. They have to either admit they were being unnecessarily cruel, or try to justify behavior that suddenly looks petty and insecure. Either way, they've lost the room, and you've demonstrated a level of self-possession that's more impressive than any comeback could have been. This is where Machiavelli's insight about mercy being more impressive than punishment reveals its deepest truth. When someone attacks you and you respond with genuine curiosity rather than retaliation, you've demonstrated power so secure it doesn't need to defend itself. You've shown mercy not from weakness, but from such overwhelming strength that their attack literally couldn't reach you. Here's exactly how you execute this in different scenarios. When someone challenges your competence publicly, "I don't think you know what you're talking about," you pause, nod slightly and say, "What specifically makes you feel that way?" Then you genuinely listen to their answer, not to defend or counter-argue, but to understand what's driving their need to diminish you. Often, they'll reveal their own insecurity in trying to explain their position. When someone tries to embarrass you with a personal detail, remember when you let them finish completely. Then you smile and say, "Yes, That was an interesting time. I learned a lot. Then you change the subject. You've acknowledged their revelation without shame or defensiveness, which completely deflates any power they thought they had over you with that information. When someone interrupts you to correct you about something you didn't actually say, "Actually, that's not right, you said," you pause, look confused for a moment, then say, "I don't remember saying that. What did you hear?" This forces them to repeat what they think you said, often revealing that they weren't really listening, and gives you the opportunity to clarify without being defensive about a position you never took. The advanced version of this operates at the level of energy rather than words. You develop such profound internal stillness that chaos can't stick to you. When someone is raging at you, screaming accusations or demands, you don't match their energy. You become calmer, not colder. Your stillness creates a space where their fury has nothing to push against, which often causes it to collapse in on itself. They're shouting, "You never listen to me, you don't care about anything I say." And you respond with something like, "I can see this is really important to you. Help me understand what you need." Your tone is warm but unshakable. You're not escalating or defending. You're creating space for the real issue underneath their explosion. This usually stops them mid-rage because they were prepared for a fight, not for genuine attention to their underlying need. They have to shift gears from attack mode to actual communication, which often reveals that their anger was covering hurt or fear that had nothing to do with you. This principle applies to digital attacks with even more devastating effectiveness. When someone writes a long, angry comment attacking your post, your character, or your ideas, the conventional response is either to defend yourself point by point or to delete and block. But power creates a third option. You respond with something like, "Thank you for taking the time to share such detailed thoughts. I can tell this topic brings up strong feelings for you." That's it. No engagement with their arguments, no defense of your position, no counterattack. You've acknowledged their effort while remaining completely unaffected by their hostility. The psychological effect on both the attacker and anyone reading is profound. The attacker realizes their aggression had no impact, which often prompts them to escalate temporarily before backing down entirely. Other readers see someone who can't be rattled by hostility, which creates respect even among those who might disagree with your original point. When you consistently respond to aggression with unshakable centeredness, something shifts in your entire social ecosystem. People stop trying to provoke you because it doesn't work. Arguments happen around you, but not with you, because others learn that you don't participate in emotional reactivity. You become like a lighthouse in a storm, a fixed point of stability that others navigate by. This creates what I call the oracle effect. People start coming to you not just for advice, but for perspective on their situations. They want to know how you see things because your viewpoint seems to cut through emotional confusion to essential truth. They trust your judgment because you've demonstrated that you don't need to be right, you don't need to win, and you don't need their agreement, which paradoxically makes your opinions more valuable to them. The business implications of this kind of presence are staggering. When you embody unshakable confidence, you don't sell, you attract. When someone says your prices are too high, instead of justifying or discounting, you say, "I understand price is a consideration. Let me know if you'd like to explore options that might work better for your budget." You're not chasing the sale, which often makes them chase you instead. When a client becomes demanding or unreasonable, instead of accommodating out of fear of losing them, you create boundaries with gentle firmness. "I want to make sure I'm providing the best service possible. For me to do that effectively, I'll need..." And then you state what you need. You're not making demands. You're sharing the conditions under which you can do your best work. This approach filters out clients who want to extract maximum value while providing minimum respect, while attracting those who understand that quality requires proper working conditions. Your business becomes more profitable, not because you're charging more, but because you're working with people who value what you provide. The philosophical foundation beneath all these applications is the recognition that most human suffering comes from wanting reality to be different than it is. When someone attacks you, disappoints you, or fails to meet your expectations, your suffering comes not from their actions, but from your resistance to the fact that they took those actions. When you truly internalize this understanding, you stop trying to control other people's behavior and start focusing on your response to whatever behavior they choose. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting mistreatment. It means becoming so internally centered that your responses come from choice rather than reactivity. This is what creates the appearance of supernatural calm that others find so magnetic and slightly unnerving. You're not suppressing emotions, you're experiencing them fully while remaining unattached to changing external circumstances to manage your internal state. Your peace comes from within, which means it can't be disrupted from without. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote about fortune being like a river that floods, but preparation and virtue allowing you to channel its force. But he was still thinking in terms of external strategy. The deeper truth is that when you master internal sovereignty, external circumstances become simply data rather than threats to your well-being. This mastery reveals itself in micro moments throughout your day. When someone cuts you off in traffic, instead of anger or retaliation, you feel mild curiosity about what urgency is driving their behavior. When someone is rude to you in a store, instead of taking it personally, you recognize they're having a difficult day and respond with patience rather than matching their energy. These small responses compound into a presence that people can sense but can't quite define. You become someone who makes others feel calmer just by being around you, not because you're trying to calm them, but because your own inner stillness is contagious. The ripple effects extend far beyond your immediate interactions. People start describing you to others in terms that surprise even them. "There's something about her," they'll say, or "he has this way of making everything seem possible." They can't pinpoint exactly what it is, which makes it more powerful than any specific skill or achievement they could name. In leadership contexts, this translates to influence that operates below the level of conscious resistance. When you suggest a direction, people find themselves wanting to explore it, not because you've convinced them through logic, but because your confidence in the idea creates curiosity in them. When you express concern about a plan, they start noticing potential problems they hadn't seen before because your attention highlights what deserves deeper consideration. This isn't manipulation. It's the natural result of developing judgment so refined and motives so clean that your instincts become worth following. People learn to trust your perspective because you've demonstrated that your insights serve the highest good rather than just your personal agenda. The romantic and social applications create relationships that operate on foundations most people never experience. When you genuinely don't need anyone else to complete you, but choose to share your completeness with others, the quality of connection transforms entirely. Love becomes an act of generosity rather than need, which creates space for it to flourish without the weight of desperation or obligation. Your friendships deepen because people can be authentic around you without fear of judgment or manipulation. They don't have to manage your emotions or protect your ego, which frees them to share their real thoughts and feelings. This creates the kind of intimacy that most people crave but rarely find, connection based on truth rather than performance. As this way of being becomes natural, you start to notice that what others call difficult people simply don't remain in your life very long. Not because you reject them, but because your energy naturally repels those who operate from manipulation, neediness, or chronic negativity. They find you boring because you don't provide the drama they're used to feeding on. Meanwhile, you attract people who are doing their own inner work, who appreciate depth over surface entertainment, who value growth over comfort. Your social circle naturally upgrades itself without you having to consciously exclude anyone. The alignment happens organically because, like energy attracts like energy. The financial abundance that flows from this way of being operates through principles that most wealth-building advice completely misses. When you embody authentic confidence, opportunities find you because confident people are natural attractors of possibility. When you demonstrate that you don't need any particular outcome, you create negotiating power that no technique can replicate. People want to do business with those who make them feel secure and inspired. When your presence conveys both complete self-possession and genuine interest in creating value for others, you become someone others actively want to work with, invest in, or promote. The abundance flows not from chasing it, but from becoming the kind of person abundance naturally finds. This extends beyond money to encompass all forms of richness. Rich relationships, rich experiences, rich opportunities for growth and contribution. You stop settling for mediocrity in any area of life because you understand that your energy attracts what matches it. When you embody excellence, excellent options appear. When you embody integrity, trustworthy people gravitate toward you. When you embody peace, your life becomes peaceful. Here's what happens when this understanding becomes embodied rather than just intellectual. You realize that the entire framework of power that society operates on is fundamentally flawed. Most people think power is about having leverage over others, but real power is about being so internally centered that you don't need leverage. You're not trying to control anyone or anything. You're simply being yourself so completely that reality reorganizes around your authentic presence. This creates what can only be described as a field effect. Just as a magnet creates an invisible field that influences everything metallic within its range, authentic personal mastery creates an invisible field that influences every social dynamic within your presence. People become more honest, more thoughtful, more purposeful when they're around you. Not because you're trying to change them, but because your own clarity makes their unconscious patterns visible to them. The conversations you have become more meaningful. The projects you're involved in seem to unfold more smoothly. The problems that arise feel more solvable. This isn't luck or coincidence. It's the natural result of operating from such internal alignment that you're able to perceive solutions and possibilities that others miss. When challenges do arise, your response comes from curiosity rather than reactivity. Interesting, you might think when faced with an obstacle. What is this teaching me? What opportunity is hidden in this situation? This perspective transforms problems from threats into puzzles, which makes them easier to solve and less stressful to navigate. People start noticing that difficult situations seem to resolve themselves around you, not because you're avoiding problems, but because your approach to problems creates space for creative solutions to emerge. Your calm presence allows others to think more clearly, which often leads to breakthroughs that wouldn't have been possible in a reactive emotional state. This is where the philosophy transcends personal development and becomes something closer to art. You're not following rules or techniques. You're expressing your deepest understanding of how reality works through every choice you make. Your life becomes a kind of living poetry, where each response reflects principles so refined they appear effortless. The silence that began as a tool becomes your natural state. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has discovered that the deepest communication happens in the spaces between words. Your presence speaks more eloquently than any speech. Your attention provides more value than any advice. Your stillness creates more movement than any action. This is what Machiavelli was reaching toward when he wrote about the prince who embodies virtue. Not virtue in the moral sense, but excellence so complete it bends circumstances to its will. But even he couldn't have imagined how this principle would apply in a world where influence operates through authenticity rather than authority. where power flows to those who need it least. You become like water, taking the shape of any container while maintaining your essential nature, flexible enough to navigate any situation, strong enough to carve through any resistance, patient enough to find the path of least resistance that leads to the most elegant solution. Your power lies not in forcing outcomes, but in aligning so completely with natural principles that outcomes align themselves with you. The ultimate paradox reveals itself. The more completely you let go of needing to control anything external, the more influence you have over everything in your environment. The more genuinely you stop caring about what others think of you, the more magnetic you become to the people whose opinions actually matter. The more willing you are to lose any particular game, the more likely you are to win the larger game of creating a life worth living. This isn't a technique to master, it's a way of being to embody. It's not a strategy to implement, it's a reality to inhabit. When you truly understand that your worth comes from your essence rather than your achievements, that your security comes from your centeredness rather than your circumstances, that your power comes from your presence rather than your possessions, everything changes. You stop performing your life and start living it. You stop trying to prove your value and start expressing it. You stop seeking validation and start creating it from within. This is not the end of ambition. It's the beginning of ambition that serves something greater than ego. It's not the death of desire. It's the birth of desire that emerges from fullness rather than emptiness. And in that transformation, you discover something that makes every other form of power seem like child's play. The unshakable joy of someone who has remembered who they really are and who expresses that remembering through every breath, every choice, every moment of every day. This is power not over others, but with others. Not against life, but as life itself, expressing its highest possibility through the vehicle of your unique presence. The silence deepens, the stillness spreads, and from that stillness everything worth creating begins.